Preparing to live stream meeting. Oh, now streaming. So, hey, we are live now. So I'm here with Gary MacDougall. Gary, how you doing?
I'm doing really well. Thanks, Hart. Thanks for having me today.
So we met, we had a phone call recently, and I found you online. You have a wonderful Facebook page called Growing the Food You Love. So why don't you tell us about Gary MacDougall and how did you come to establish the Facebook page? Tell us a little bit about how the food you grow, and why are you in a high rise right now? And what does the future hold for you?
I cover let's see, where do I start? This is like 8 years of information here. So I can summarize briefly.
I've got all night.
Right. Thank you very much for having me. I really appreciate, having these discussions. Yeah, I am in a high rise right now. We've sold our house recently. I lived in suburbia on a 1/4 acre. I was running a page called Grow the Food You Love, and it started because we dug up our front yard about 8 years ago, I think it was. I think we did about 7 summers, about 7 years ago. And my wife and I were growing food in a little bit veggie patch in the back. And my interest was growing like plants. And I was doing landscaping back then. I did landscaping for years. And my wife wanted to grow veggies. We had young children. She wanted to do something wholesome with the kids. And she just made a decision she was going to dig up the yard and plant some things. So I saw it, but there wasn't enough sun. And I knew it would never thrive. So I did it for a couple of seasons with her. And I fell in love with growing food. It was just something to do with my wife, do with the kids. And it was seeing the children's reaction to seeing a squash grow and get really big and planting seeds and getting their hands dirty. I just loved everything about it. So we dug up our front yard, started growing food, and people, our neighbors, at first I was afraid, I'm growing food in my front yard and I've got chickens in the backyard and we got fruit trees all around. And I was afraid at first of what people would think, but it was I was so passionate about growing food, and then started learning about climate change and how growing food in a regenerative way could help the climate. I thought, man, I'm just going to do this. I'm passionate about it. Who cares what people think? And but it came that people started loving it and people started asking about it, and they were asking us questions. We get the same questions over and over. I'm like, finally, I'm just going to start Grow the Food You Love on Facebook. I'm going to do a Q&A every week, and if people have questions, they can ask me there, because I'm not answering people's questions, the same question over and over and over all the time. So I did that. We grew a business from it. I was doing consultations. I did a membership, and it just got to a point where I felt like I wasn't making a big enough difference in the world. I was doing some climate activism, but I felt like I wanted to get on more land. It's funny, Hart, you brought up the Soil for Climate page. So many people on that page, and so many people that are featured, like the Gabe Browns, Mark Shepard, the Joel Salatins, Dr. Christine Jones, I think her name is. So many of these people inspired me, just I got to get on pasture. I got to get more livestock. I got to get chickens and pigs and cows to make a bigger difference. And so that's what kind of led me here. And now we sold our house, and I'm living in a hotel downtown Victoria, British Columbia in Canada. And I'm looking across the street from the Hilton and the Marriott. And this, I just feel so alien here. I can't wait to get some land. So I'm seeking somewhere in the world for that. So
let's talk about. So you wanted more. You fell in love with growing food.
Fell in love with it.
You had fun with it, and you got to where you didn't care what the neighbors thought. And then you decided that you wanted more land. So you're in a transition now. You're moving to where you're going to have more land.
Yeah.
So what do you have your land picked out? Are you in the market for it, or what?
No, we're looking, and this is one of the challenges, and I think a lot of people could relate to this, because I see people struggling in this, and it's not just here. We live in the west coast of Canada. Real estate prices have jumped dramatically. Since we got in our house years ago, 11 years ago, we bought our house. Our house is more than double. To get farmland here on our island, it costs multi-millions of dollars. If I wanted to buy a house on 10 acres, it would, the $2 to $3 million range. So I'm not shopping here. I don't want to make sacrifices to try to help the climate by working my butt off and never seeing my kids. So we're looking elsewhere. I'm originally from the east coast of Canada. Not sure if my family wants to move back there, but it's a lot cheaper. I could find land there for a tenth of the cost. So we're open. We're possibly traveling to Costa Rica for a couple of months soon, and looking for somewhere in the world to kind of ground ourselves and do that good regenerative work. So we're in the seeking phase. I'm 47 years old. I feel like I'm a young 20 something again, looking for my place in the world, but at least I know myself a little bit better now, and I know what we want. We know the difference we want to make.
So we were at some point, we're going to talk about, the role of regenerative agriculture and growing your own food,
right.
how that relates to climate.
Yeah.
In my own world, I have much more of a clue about that. And as of the last year and a half, as opposed to previously, I thought I would take a minute to tell my story and then we'll go from there. So I was a conservative Republican most of my life. And then about 10 years, I was kind of indifferent as to the two major parties in the US. And so nothing wrong with, I mean, I'm not diminishing conservative Republican. I'm kind of coming back around to some of that, but there's kind of an ideology. I'm saying now, people before ideology. We have to put people first and not focus on ideology. But being a Republican is kind of like there's this commitment to a free market, which to me is an ideology that just doesn't have much merit at all. And then there's this American exceptionalism where we tell ourselves a story, we fill our heads with mythology, and we end up dominating the world. It doesn't work very well for American citizens. It certainly doesn't work very well for the rest of the world. And both parties are doing that now. So
can I ask you a quick question about that? Because I am Canadian.
Yeah.
What's the American mythology that you Americans tell yourself, if you don't mind me asking?
Well, you might call it the city on a hill, or the indispensable nation. I was listening to a Republican on the radio today, and he was getting a lot of things right, but then he said something about the world, something like the world's just going to fall apart if we're not here to guide the world into freedom. So it's all this rhetoric about freedom and democracy, but the rhetoric and the reality are two entirely different things. If you know a damn thing about history, and this is what I know now that I didn't know my entire life.
Right.
You know a damn thing about history, you know that the United States in the world has been anything but an advocate for freedom. We don't care, we meaning our government, don't care one bit for freedom. We're always doing regime change. Saudi Arabia is one of our best allies, and they're terrible. And it's not about freedom and democracy. It's the facts on the ground do not support that one bit. And It's a big, huge lie. And I know you're a Michael Parenti fan. Michael Parenti says that the republic pays for the empire.
Right.
We, the people at home, are paying for this big empire, which enriches the richest people. It doesn't benefit us. And another sense, the republic, meaning our democratic freedoms and our power as a democratic populace, is always diminished by empire and by war.
Right.
So that's what I know now that I didn't know before.
So if we bring this back to water and climate, like you think about how the climate is suffering, how, like, I live on the west coast of Canada, we've had fires in the last couple of years, we've had intense flooding, we've had heat domes, like people suffering from intense heat, like and we talk about is CO2 the only thing that's the problem, or is it things like empire? Is it like all that CO2 that's being burned, is it empire in like the global shipping of goods and how free trade, we ship food as commodities all over the planet, and the prairies, the Great Plains that were once 200 million filled with buffalo and carbon rich soil and biodiversity is now like single monocultures of corn and soy and only a couple of crops, and all that soil is being washed away. There's pollution, and this is all being driven by systems and policy that was put in place and by free trade in the 80s and the 90s, and people look for one party or the other to kind of fix these systems, and are they working? Like when you had talked to you, part of this title was can we solve the climate crisis? And I even asked that question, like, can we actually solve the climate crisis? The problem's so big. So just to bring it back to water and climate and why I farm, it's like, it seems so simplistic, and people might see it as like a peasant kind of a nice thing to do, but it's like, I can't envision something better to do.
Mhm.
Because we talked about Planet of the Humans, and it shows about like, is green technology actually green? I'm like, when I started looking into it and I saw that movie, it's like, it didn't look that green. All
Mhm.
that mining, all that shipping.
Mhm.
Like, can an industrial
Right,
civilization support a healthy climate?
right.
So that's why I was super excited when I meet somebody like you, Hart. It excites me because it's like, it's just such a relief. Like, that's what it is. Like, it's painful and it can be depressing when you go down
Mhm.
this path, right? When you start
Right.
learning about this stuff, but to find somebody who gets it and kind of questions it, and
Mhm.
doesn't just follow the ideology. And this is where I kind of went,
Well,
I left.
let me ask you something. Let me interrupt you just a minute.
Please,
So you
please
said
interrupt.
something about like we have systems that aren't working for us and we
Right.
need to change the systems. So how
Yeah.
would you describe those systems and what needs to change and what are we really trying to get
Okay,
to?
so I'm not an economist, right? And I'm not a politician, but
Good.
it's something like, I was getting a little bit into climate activism.
Mhm.
And this is what I saw. It's like, here I live on the West Coast, and look at the major drivers of industry and the economy. It's like homes that are being built. I see hotels all around me. I see, forests are being, everybody knows about the old growth forest that's being cut down here on the West Coast. It is profitable to pollute and damage ecosystems. Like, that's a part of the capitalist system.
Mhm.
Like, everything is a resource. And my heart goes out to those people that are working in those industries. They have to put food on the plate. They have to keep a roof over their head. That's what, like, so many people just get born into this capitalist resource extractive system. How do you change that? I was inspired by Indigenous people years ago. I used to travel to the plains and spend time with the Lakota people. And the big major shift I think we need to do is shift from a resource-based economy to like seeing our living systems, our ecosystems, our climate as a living thing that we need to take care of. And how can we live in this system in a way that doesn't extract and pollute and hurt our climate? I think those are the questions we need to ask
Well,
individually.
let me, okay, I'm gonna throw this out to you, see if it
Go
makes
for it,
sense.
please.
So to me, the last thing we need is to try to construct an ideology that kind of almost becomes a religion,
Right. Yeah.
but so to me, the way forward has to do with creating as much awareness as we can,
Yeah.
awareness as to the past, the past and the present, like what is the world really like. Noam Chomsky is a great role model because
Yeah.
he has an ideology, but in my world he's mainly a teacher of history. He'll teach you what really happened, what really goes on, and he's a media critic, so he can tell you how the media really works irrespective of the perceptions and what they want you to believe
Right.
about them. So to me, I think what I will do insofar as I can is just to share what I know about how the world works, let people, try to instill some awareness so that people can make their own decisions. And I
Right.
think part of that is, okay, so here's one aspect of that. And that is, I believe that urbanization is artificial. It's, the wealthy people, especially in the last 500 years, the wealthy people have enclosed the commons. They've used physical and military force to drive people off the land. They've also changed the economics of living in the countryside so that it's less and less affordable for more and more people. And
Yeah.
then you kind of drive people into the cities where they provide cheap labor and they become consumers for what the industrial civilization is selling.
Yeah.
So I think that's artificial. And so when I remember once I was on a webinar and I said something like, I think we need more people per acre in the countryside caring for the land, tending the land. And that way, if we need to get rid of invasive species, well, you can do it mechanically rather than having to do it with chemicals, that kind of thing. And you can grow your food, et cetera. So, and somebody said, oh, you're just being idealistic. And here's my response. Where did we get our ideals? Where did we get our jaded ideals and our low expectations? So I would like to be able to use whatever I would like to be able to cast a vision for what's possible.
Right.
And in order to understand what's possible, we have to understand what is being taken from us every single day. And in my own mind, just pull a number out of the air, but something like 2/3 to 3/4 of the wealth and opportunity in the world is being hoarded, and the resources are being hoarded by a very, very few. So I think if we could be more aware of that, and then we would be more inclined to have a collective decision-making that is characteristic of pre-industrial tribes, et cetera. And we could live on a lot less if we had it, if we had it, if we could stop the theft, if we could stop what is ours from being stolen from us day by day by day by day by day. The taxes that we spend for military adventurism that we don't want, as well as the money that we pay for cars and houses that just wouldn't, and consumer goods that wouldn't be necessary if we, the people, got to design our world. And to do that, I'm going to try to stop talking right now, but to do that, we have to get control. We have to realize how the world is being controlled by very few people, and we have to somehow get that control for ourselves.
Right. And that's why I'm planning the move to land where it's cheaper and we could potentially buy it. And then instead of worrying about bills and paying for my kids' college and stuff, we could have a house that's paid for, and then we can live the life that we want by design, that leaves me feeling good in my conscience, in my heart, in my soul. I thought that it was cool that your name's Hart, but in my heart, my soul, that it feels right. Like it feels good, because we can keep telling ourselves stories like it's good to consume and work hard and kill it and make lots of money and consume stuff, and that's going to bring us happy, but it doesn't. Like it brings some people happiness, but does it? We get born into this system. There's so many people live in the illusion, right? I'm surrounded right now.
Not living the dream, but living the illusion.
Not leaving this dream, but reminding myself daily, like, okay, I'm listening. Where is that place in this planet? Where is that place on this earth where I can use my hands to be that regenerative force and live that life where I'm interacting with life, that I'm a part of the earth, I'm not separate from it, and I can use my hands to heal the earth, to raise livestock, to grow food in a really healthy way that's good for the planet, and it's good for me. It's good for the animal during its living life, and then it provides me with nutrition. So yeah.
Okay, so you said one thing I think you're describing is how it feels right when we're interacting with nature.
Yeah.
And part of that is gardening and farming and raising livestock, being close to the earth. So we feel, when we're doing that, we feel like we've come home.
Yeah.
And that's why I think, people spend money on gardening as a hobby, and people have hobby farms, and people hunt as a hobby and fish as a hobby and spend a lot of money doing those things. Or they would like to have a humble little shop and do their craft. People would love to do that if they could, but those opportunities have been taken away from us.
Right. When you say the opportunity's been taken away from people, what do you mean by that?
Well, I think it's just the way things have panned out. About 10,000 years, and this is an oversimplification probably, but about 10,000 years ago, we originally 10,000 years ago and prior to that, we were hunter-gatherers. We didn't store up very much at all. And there are nuanced and complicated kind of stories about this, but in my simplistic understanding, we were hunter-gatherers, which is 99% of our time on this earth as a human species. We've been hunter-gatherers, so that's the way we're wired genetically. That's the way we're wired socially, and then we somehow moved into agriculture, which involves a certain amount of private property. It involves a certain amount of storing up grains, and if you store something, you have to protect it. You probably have slaves that grow the food, slaves or servants that help you grow it, that help you store it, that help you process it. And we move, that move from hunter-gatherer to agriculture was a huge thing. And that set up a system where we have supposedly a lucky few that have power, and the rest of people go with the flow. There's a saying that the rich do what they can and the poor do what they must.
Right.
And so it's just an imbalance of power. And it's like, I like saying democracy is where you get to vote on what affects you. There's a whole lot that we don't get to vote on, even though we go to the voting booth. Freedom is participation in power. We, the people, especially if you're in the lower 80–90% of income, we the people don't have a meaningful amount of power, and that power is concentrated in the very few. So that's just the way things have unfolded.
Right. Yeah. And even when you talk about power, it's like people think they have power because they can vote and they're encouraged to vote. But the two-party system, you talk about a two-party system in the States, and it's similar here in Canada. Maybe it's more like a 3 or 4-party system, but so much is determined pre-vote. Do you really have power in that way? So that a part of, I became disillusioned with the system in many ways because I wasn't sure if my vote would actually have a benefit to the climate. So yeah, I really want to go let's study history.
Tell me about that. Expand on that a little bit.
I want to expand on one other point first,
okay.
Because you said 10,000 years ago, and I'm thinking, when you're saying that, I'm thinking that you only have to go back 150, 170 years here on the land that I'm on.
Exactly.
I'm on the traditional territory of the Coast Salish or Lekwungen people, and those people before colonization back in the 1850s here, and this area where I live in Victoria, British Columbia, it was colonized because it was flat. And everywhere up and down the West Coast, if you know the West Coast from California to Alaska, it's very rocky and it's very treed and beautiful big trees. There wasn't a whole lot of flat area to do agriculture, but it was flat here. And there was open areas, so they could farm. So they colonized this area in the 1850s or so. So only 170 years ago, for 10,000 years, the indigenous people on this land, they tended the land, they thinned the trees, they built they got their food, clothing, and shelter totally localized, and it was a regenerative system. It was putting a lot of carbon back in the soil. They were caring for their environment. They weren't taking too much from the sea. They're eating mostly salmon, mostly fish, clams, and they cared for the earth in a way that there was always food for the next generation. They were always thinking the next generation. Now, in our industrial civilization, with a population only in the last couple of hundred years has gone from 1 billion to 8 billion, how regenerative are our systems right now? It doesn't look regenerative. So kind of explore the idea of, like, are we heading towards collapse? Are we heading towards climate catastrophe? We're seeing some climate chaos. We need to change dramatically if we want to sustain humans on this planet.
Okay, Gary.
That's my thought now.
Yeah. So tell me, what would you like to see change? Let's say Gary MacDougall is king of the world for 4 years, and there aren't any obstacles in terms of having to compromise. What changes would you like to see happen?
Right. It's so tough, and people ask me that, right? When I critique green technology, my local climate group, and people are like, well, if that's true, they get defensive and they get angry, like, what do I do? And it's like, that's what we have to ask ourselves. Like, how can I be that healer of the planet? As far as systemic changes, I mean, do we give up ownership of stuff? Do more people need to have a say in this regenerative movement? Do more people need to become educated on what it would actually take to sustain human life? It's so broad and complex. All I know at the small level, this is me at like the micro level, is I know I need to be that change first. I want to live on land where I can have influence over that land and live more regeneratively, produce more food, and live in a way that increases the soil microbiology. It puts more carbon in the soil. It increases biodiversity on land, and I can produce more food. That's me at a micro level. At a macro level, just encourage more people to see that, to see the regenerative story, to watch films like Kiss the Ground, to see where each of you and I and everybody can be a part of that climate and ecological solution. Because to me, it's so much more than just CO2. It's the exploitation of labor in Asia where we get our cheap goods. It's biodiversity loss. It's we're crossing planetary boundaries and putting too much nitrogen in our food systems, and we're losing soil and all these things. It's not sustainable right now. We need to move from this degenerative system to regenerative system. How do you change? I'm not an economist. How do you change that? I start with myself, and then organize with as many people, tell this story. I'm passionate about speaking, about educating, and just to get as many people on board to make that change. Because I know for me, like in Kiss the Ground, I've gotten really depressed at our systems. I've gotten really depressed at how exploited workers are in China, for example, who work 30 days a week and don't get to see their families. And there's suicide rates are at an alarming rate in iPhone factories and stuff. And but that somehow is okay because it's more efficient and cheaper to build them there than it is here. Like, that to me is not okay, and that's really depressing. But on the other hand, when we start making changes and we start healing and grieving what actually is in the world, we can start then get to the other side. Joanna Macy talks about getting past acceptance and getting into that next stage of inspiration. And I think that's where Kiss the Ground really helps. It's like we can actually be a really good force of change on this planet. We can help people and we can help the planet. So yeah, that's what drives me. So
Right.
that's in the next 4 years. And will that happen? I don't know. This is inevitable. Death is inevitable. Our systems eventually will collapse. Let's hope it's not so chaotic. Let's hope that we do so in a way that is regenerative. And like my kids have a future. I have 3 children. They're 10, 12, and 15. I'm concerned for their future. I don't know if we can continue to have these wildfires that California's having and live with the smoke in the summertime. The fires are getting longer. They're getting more intense. They're burning down people's houses. It's bad. So we have to change. And hopefully people get that regenerative agriculture and getting water into the climate, getting water into our landscapes, is a part of the solution. And we can wet the climate, we can cool the climate, and we can be a part of that force yeah.
Well, let me share with you what I would respond. So when I think about what I would change,
Yeah.
there's the bottom up and then there's the top down. If you start with the top down, it sounds authoritarian. It sounds like what people call communistic or something like that.
Yeah.
Having said that, I think there has to be limits to power. I mean, there has to be limits. And since money is power, there has to be limits on how much money any one person can have. And one of the essential functions of government to me I'm not talking about giving up private property. I'm talking about the only people that have to give up anything are like the top 1%, maybe 10%, something like that. They have to give up power long enough for us to take a breath and say, okay, what do we want? So that's the top. That involves like splitting up monopolies. It involves stopping the theft. I mean, if you want to say what should be the relationship of government to what should be the relationship of we the people and our government to the richest people, there just needs to be ways of placing limits and stopping the theft. And the theft comes in the form of, let me see, I've got it here somewhere. But it's like environmental pollution is a theft of our health. Too much carbon and too much deforestation and too much of the wrong kind of farming is a theft of our climate, and our wildlife. So so that's some of the top down stuff. The bottom up stuff, I would say, okay, who volunteers to go farm in a way that is reasonably restorative and regenerative? Here's your 100 acres, and we're not going to be taxing you $3,000 per capita per year to pay for the Pentagon. And we're not going to, we're just going to lower the cost of living, because the cost of living is high because a few people are taking, they're using us as consumers, and that's the reason the cost of living is high to me. But
Yeah.
I think a whole lot of people would love to garden and farm and tend the forest, hunt and fish, and have a humble life in a small community where you only have to work maybe 20 hours a week, and the rest you do what you want to do. And then when you do what you want to do, you start working at what you're really passionate about. Maybe it's music, maybe it's organizing community activities, maybe it's cooking. We could have thriving culture if we didn't have this constant theft of our time, money, attention, and resources. So I would say there's going to be some, in Hart Hagan's perfect world, where Hart Hagan is king for 4 years, there's going to be some land reform. Some people are going to, some of the land is going to be taken from some of the people. There would be limitations on absentee ownership, absentee investors. There's just got to be a limit. There should be limits to how rich you can be before you're no longer allowed to cut down timber in my county. I mean, there just has to be limits on how much some people can own, and there needs to be more local ownership and control of businesses, more local ownership and control of land and the fruit of the land, such as timber and agriculture and things like that. And I think people would love that, and it would be a step in the right direction. It would be a step toward freedom for almost all people.
Right. I totally agree. And I think we're going to depend on, we're going to depend on people's goodness and like people and other people like you and I organizing at the local level, where we can have more influence, in the political arena. I'll give you, I was just thinking of an example. I was here on the island of Vancouver Island. I'm all for logging when it comes to caring for the environment and leaving it a little bit better. So for example, there's places in like California and here up and down the West Coast where we have fires, and a lot of those fires are burning really hot because the land isn't being cared for, and there's a lot of dead undergrowth. Well, that dead undergrowth burns really hot. When the fires come, they get super hot and they just burn like wildfire, and it burns crazy, and it does so much damage. But if people tended for that land, and they cleared out some of that undergrowth or did controlled burns, where the indigenous people used to do that generation after generation, they did cool controlled burns. They wouldn't let fires get out of control. They would keep them really cool, and they'd burn that underbrush so it wouldn't get dry and hot and then burn super out of control and create absolute chaos. So we need to be better caretakers for the land. And so, yeah.
Sounds great.
That's and to be honest, I don't know what the future is going to look like. And we don't know. There's a lot of chaos now. Hopefully we can transition to a more regenerative, hopefully this can reach the tipping point where more people get it, and they can, I think a lot of people are really caught up in that extractive economy where they're busy with their jobs and that their paycheck depends on that. I get it. And it would be tough. And I think that creates conflict for a lot of people. My hope is that more people kind of walk away from it and they start aligning with what's inside, with what feels right. And I know regenerative work for me really excites me, and I love doing it. And I want to tell this story. Like for 8 years we've done that, and we didn't make enough money to pay for our house, so we had to sell it. So I went through like having to lose that. And I think a lot of people are afraid of that. Mm-hmm. But I voluntarily did that, and it's not that bad. Yes, I'm living in a hotel downtown. Mm-hmm. I'm on the 9th floor, and I've given up my house, but I still have an option. I have my life. I have my health because I listened. I left that job that wasn't fulfilling, and I'm now at 47 years old. I feel like I did in my 20s. I feel more alive, and I feel healthy, and I feel like better about being a father to my children. And because I've made this change, I feel like I can give them a better future. Maybe not so much financially, but I can be in their life. And I feel more inspired that I can be a part of the change, the regenerative change that we need on this planet. So yeah, there's a lot there, but.
Sounds great. Well, Gary, this has been a wonderful conversation. Why don't we come back and talk about this again very soon?
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Hart. I don't know if you want to end this call and we'll just chat about it afterwards, but
Yeah, let's hang on the call. I'll end the live part and we'll
okay.
go from there. Thank you
Thank
to our
guys.
audience
So
for joining
I'll
us.
just say this to people. If people do watch this, I'll say this. We'll just ask a question. I just came to my mind is like, what changes are people making? And you know, sometimes I get negative feedback like, oh, people aren't going to do it. I'm like, fine, not everybody's going to do this, right? But if you are, like, did you get something from this conversation? Are you inspired to make change? You know, yeah, I'd like to hear that from people. So
sounds good. Well, we should make this a regular thing. Thank you for joining me. And
you're welcome.
but hang on and we'll talk.
Will do.